of lonely times when your spouse is deployed, but the loneliest time is dinner time because, and especially on the ordinary Sunday, people always say, "Oh, I feel so sad that your husband's going to be gone on Christmas or your birthday or your anniversary." But those days, people remember you, they call you, they invite you over because those are the special days. But um, the ordinary Sunday, when you're sitting down to dinner with your family, those are the days that it's really the hardest because other people are busy with their families. They're not necessarily thinking of you at that time. Sundays and dinner time, that's family time. And that's when his absence is felt the most. So I was worried about feeling that loneliness again during those times.
What was your children's reaction to that news for that a full year they would be without their dad?
Mm. Yeah, I think especially for the younger one who was 4 at the time, that's a really hard concept. I don't think he truly understood what it meant that he would be gone a year. I'm not sure the older ones really understood either, fully understood what it meant. They were angry probably to start with a little bit. Looking back, I see a lot of behavior problems and things that at the time I thought, what's going on? What am I doing wrong? And I realized looking back that a lot of it was just reaction to what was about to happen.
So where did the genesis of this idea come from?
It came from that I'm very big on all of us eating dinner together. In fact, sometimes, I want to limit the amount of things they're doing after school and whatever, because I feel like it's important for a couple of nights that we sit down together at the dinner table. And we were eating dinner one night before my husband left, and we were talking about how it would be strange to not have him at the dinner table, and that we would have, basically 365 nights of just the 4 of us instead of the 5 of us, grabbing 4 forks instead of 5 forks, and 4 plates instead of 5 plates, and so the boys were saying how that would be sad, and I said, well, then we won't be lonely. We'll fill his chair. We'll invite friends over, and then it just sort of grew from that. Especially once the community started responding, when we first started telling people and inviting people, and people just loved it, and it started growing from there.
So it just came out of you in that conversation, or had you thought about it prior to that?
No. But even then, at that time, even when I said it, I wasn't really sure. I never thought that I would write a book about it. I knew I would write columns about it because that's what I do. But yeah, it just sort of, I thought it was going to be something we did to pass the time. But when I first started writing about it, people really loved it and, were asking questions about it. And so it really was fed by reader reaction because it just started growing from there.
I guess we should explain what it is. What did you and your boys do for that full year?
Right. So I knew my husband was going to be gone for 13 months. It ended up being not, as is typical with the military, that they say one thing and it ends up being shorter or longer. But for 52 weeks that my husband was gone, I said that we would invite one guest each week to fill his seat at the dinner table. And I thought at first we would invite school teachers, neighbors, friends, but the boys started saying, well, could we invite the mayor? Could we invite a policeman? Could we invite, our senator actually lives here in the city, and she's quite visible, Senator Susan Collins. And, people see her at the grocery store, out at restaurants and stuff. So that was someone they said, well, we should invite Senator Collins. And so the idea was just that we would have one person each week come and fill that gap at dinner time with us.
And so did you concoct a list with the boys? How did it work? Was it like an ongoing thing that every week, let's, send an invitation to X person?
Right. At first we sat down and we came up with a list, and we decided these are people that, and like I said, it was going to be mostly teachers, they wanted to have their friends and their friends' parents, neighbors, things like that. But then the list kind of grew to be, the mayor, the governor, the senator. In the beginning, the boys were writing invitations, and the very first invitation to Senator Susan Collins, Ford wrote that one, and that one's in the book, what he wrote that first letter. But, for about the first month or maybe even the first couple of weeks, the boys were helping with that part of it, but then they got tired of being, having to write all these letters and coordinate everything. And so by the end, I was definitely the social coordinator. And at that point too, people knew what we were doing and were saying, kind of inviting themselves, that was when the governor said, would you come have dinner with us? And Senator Angus King, who was then just a candidate in September, said that he wanted to come have dinner. So while we started out in the beginning that we came up with lists and we sent an invitation to people, towards the end it was sort of growing to the point where people were inviting us, and it was really a community effort.
That's a pretty brisk pace, right? Weekly for for an entire year. I'm curious, when you had that initial conversation with your boys and you said, what do you guys think of this? What was their reaction?
About inviting someone to dinner, you
Yeah.
mean? I think that they were, like I said, at the time it wasn't really a thing yet. Like we didn't even know that someone would be taking pictures. We didn't know that I would write about it. It was truly just let's invite people over to dinner. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that they really thought anything of it at the time because it just seemed really normal. I think once the community started really grasping on to the idea and people were asking us out in town, who's next? Who's coming to dinner next? That became kind of funny for the boys, that they realized how public it had become. And my youngest one, actually at preschool, would introduce himself when volunteers would come to the classroom. He would introduce himself as, I'm Lyndall Smiley from Dinner with the Smileys.
That's very funny. And he was how old at that point?
5.
5. Oh my goodness. So you already had the name of your book down pat by that point, right?
Yeah.
What would you say? I mean, there's just so much fascinating learning. I obviously you're talking about some of the conversations and things that you had with the different guests. What would you say that overall your boys learned from this wonderful experience?
There's so many different lessons. Like, one of the lessons I love is that they learned that politicians are just people. We had Democrats, we had Republicans, we had independents, and no matter who came to dinner at this table that I'm sitting at right now, the boys realized that when it comes down to it, they're just people. Congressman Michoud from the 2nd District here in Maine, we had lunch with him actually at a restaurant after we put flags out at graves for Memorial Day. And our lunch was late. The waitress was running behind. And so Congressman Michoud pulled out a pen from his pocket and a napkin and started doing tic-tac-toe with the boys. And some of my friends said, oh my gosh, that's so funny, you played tic-tac-toe with a congressman. And I said, well, what else do you do when you're at a restaurant? He's just a human. And when the food is late and the kids are getting cranky, you do tic-tac-toe. And so I think it was interesting to the boys to see all of these people. We had an Olympic gold medalist, we had a Major League Baseball player, a lot of really big names, but around the dinner table, they were just people. And the boys got to see them not as idols, not as celebrities or politicians, but just actual people that, say, could you pass me the butter? Could you, put ketchup on their fries? Or, all these things that are just so human that happen around the dinner table. And when we had dinner with our current governor, Governor LePage of Maine, he's not a very popular governor right now in the state of Maine. And the boys didn't know that. But when we went to dinner with him and I wrote that column, I got criticized in the newspaper for going to dinner with him and people saying, why would we accept an invitation from that man, is what they said. And when I told the boys, they were shocked. They were like, but he was so nice. And he let us play hide and go seek in the governor's mansion, and they served us brownies. And so to them, I think it was a really good lesson about taking away the labels off of people, that when it really comes down to it, we're all just people. We also lost a lot of people along the way. Our one neighbor next door, we were supposed to have dinner number 17 with, and I kept putting it off because she had gone to live in an assisted living facility. And I thought, no rush. She's not going anywhere. So some of these other guests that had time-sensitive schedules, I kept bumping her dinner so that we would fit in these other guests. And we finally decided that we would have her dinner in April. I think it was April 22nd. And when I called to confirm with the assisted living facility, I found out she had died 2 weeks before that. So we ended up still going to the assisted living facility to have dinner with some of her neighbors and people she knew there. And we ended up having dinner with an elderly man who just passed away a couple of weeks ago, and his wife who has Alzheimer's. And so the boys, learned about Alzheimer's. That was the first time they'd been around someone that had that. Another one of our guests died in November. He was 94. And that was the first funeral the boys had been to. So I think that they learned compassion and about all of the different ways there are to be lonely. That we were going through a rough time with my husband being gone, but then we met all of these people, like the man whose wife had Alzheimer's, the 94-year-old neighbor who passed away, and his wife had passed away 13 years before that. He lived 13 years as a widower. So the boys learned that while it was a hard time for us, that their dad was coming back. Oh, we also had someone who had lost their son overseas in Afghanistan. So I think that they got a big perspective of that lots of people have hard times, and that there's lots of different ways to be lonely.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what a rich learning experience for them. Now, I'm curious, did you keep your husband out in Africa working for the military updated, and did he wonder at any point, do they miss me back there?
He was the biggest pusher of this idea because he was here when we first started talking about it at the dinner table. And when he was leaving, he kept saying, I think you should do that where you invite people to dinner, because he was worried about us being isolated. And the hardest thing when your husband is gone overseas is it's very easy to become isolated and to not reach out and tell people what you need or how you're feeling. And so he really liked the idea of us being connected to the community and people being aware that we were, alone and needed help during this time. He also said that by people coming and sitting in his seat, his empty seat, made his absence and therefore other service members' absences more present. It's easy to forget, but a lot of our guests had trouble sitting in his seat because when the kids showed them to the chair and said, this is where you're going to sit because this is my dad's chair, a lot of them said, oh, I don't think I could sit there. I don't feel comfortable. For them, it felt like, how could I sit in this man's chair? And they were people that I'm not sure otherwise would have had that realization of, here I am sitting at dinner with this man's family. He hasn't seen them in a year. He wishes he could be here. So it was an important lesson for the community, too, about what service members are actually leaving behind at home and sacrificing. So I don't think Dustin ever felt like we didn't miss him or that he knew we weren't replacing him. I think he liked that people came to, help his family through this time. And he Skyped with some of our guests, too, at the dinners.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, let me ask you, as a mother of three, as a military wife, in what ways did this year of experiences impact and change you?
Well, I am not an entertainer, and I'm not a cook. My house is usually a wreck.
Oh.
And I'm not very big on manners with the boys, this just would have killed my mom. I was serving, when we had Senator Susan Collins to dinner, I was just taking paper towels and folding them into fourths to be napkins. And, I had ketchup bottles on the table. So I think it was a struggle for me. I like to kind of just hide away and could very easily get depressed that way. And so it was a struggle each time for me to do these things of, open up our home, make small talk, make dinner, kind of clean up the house a little bit. But it taught me that it feels good to do that. While sometimes it felt like an effort, and I would think, oh gosh, we have a dinner, and I've got to make dinner, and I've got to clean the house. Afterwards, I always felt buoyed, and I felt like, oh, I can't wait for the next dinner. And it taught me that reaching out to people really feels better when you have a community that's there helping you. It also taught me that when you invite people to dinner, they're not coming to be wowed by your cooking or your house or your children's manners. They're coming for company. And they're coming because probably they would have had dinner alone that night too. So I don't think any of our guests walked out saying, I wish I hadn't come because her lasagna was cold. Like I said, I'm not a great cook. So nobody was coming for the food. So I think it taught me that it feels good to reach out and have people come over, even though sometimes it might feel like an effort. And people really aren't as expecting as much as we think they are.
Very interesting. Now, one of the parts of this story that just captivates me is the idea of community and how today simply organizing everybody's schedules to, arrange for a dinner date is a huge task, which usually for most families, you have this excuse, that excuse, this activity, etc. So for you to be able to maintain that over a year is extraordinary. But it's also about face-to-face contact for me. That in this digital world that we live in, a lot of people just don't have that anymore. How do you think your boys were impacted by that? Because they're right in the wheelhouse of all the technology too, right? In their ages. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, nothing can replace sitting down at a dinner table with people. And that's why it's always been so important to me to have dinner with the boys. And to make time for that. I find my middle son, he doesn't eat a whole lot. There's not a lot of foods. He's kind of the picky eater. But he always wants to know when's dinner time. And sometimes I say, why does it matter? You're not going to probably eat what I make. But he just likes that being around the dinner table together, that one-on-one interaction, FaceTime, when he has our undivided attention. And, and I think for some of our guests that came, maybe they've moved away from that tradition of sitting down at a table. We do a lot of when we entertain, we have people have plastic plates that they balance on their knees in the living room, or they stand in the kitchen while they eat and they're trying to hold their glass. So for a lot of our guests, I think this idea of, we're actually going to sit around her table. No matter how many people came, we had hockey players and a hockey coach come, as well as my mother-in-law was here for that one. And my table, which you can't see right now, it only really seats 6 people. But we would cram as many people as we could, whether we had bar stools pulled up here, children's chairs, because the idea was to all sit together and be looking at each other. And I never wanted the dinner to become where, the kids run off and play and the adults stand in the kitchen and eat their dinner. Mm-hmm. We did have a few dinners where, so this is interesting that in the beginning, I held very firm to that it would be at our dinner table. We would fit as many people as we could around the dinner table. But towards the end, when people started inviting us and the idea was growing, we had a lot of big groups invite us to come to them, such as the Troop Greeters of Maine, which we couldn't do at our home because there's like 30 of them. So we had a picnic outside at one of their homes. We went to the Boston Red Sox. And, and that was kind of a loose meal. They met some of the players and we ate in the stands. And my boys started telling me, we need to get back to the dinners that are at our table. They really started to miss that. And they would say, this didn't feel like a dinner with the Smileys. And I would say, why? And they would say, well, because we weren't sitting at a table. Or, the kids all went off and did something and just the grown-ups were talking. So I think that they really grew to love the idea that there was no kids table, there was no, adult room and the kids go off and play. Or, I know a lot of people in my generation do, let's have the kids eat first, get them out of the way, and then we'll sit down to talk and eat. We didn't do any of that. And I think the boys grew to love that no matter who was here, whether it was a congressman, a senator, an artist, a teacher, they were included at the dinner table, face-to-face conversation. And towards the end, when we started doing some of these other things like picnics and different types of outings, they were the ones telling me, Mom, get back to the idea of people coming to our house, to our table, and sitting with us.
Wow. What a lovely, lovely impact that it had on them. Yeah. Sarah, what do you hope that readers of this book will take away from it?
I think, It started out that I thought this is a good way for people to know how lonely some military families are, and especially at dinner time, and that, reach out and invite someone whose spouse is deployed. But as the year went on, I realized that there are a lot of people who are lonely at dinner time. There's widows and widowers in assisted living facilities. Like our dinner guest number 17, he had not lost his wife yet, but she had Alzheimer's, so he had basically lost her. So even though he was physically sitting right next to her at dinner, he was still alone. We met people that were single for whatever reason. And I think that what I hope people will realize is that there are a lot of people that will accept your invitation to dinner, that want an invitation to dinner, and that how much is gained from sharing a meal with people and the connections that you make that I'm not sure can be made in any other way than sitting down and sharing a meal face to face. In the beginning, I thought, how are we going to get 52 people to agree to have dinner with us? And to me, I thought people are going to be so busy in their schedules, and how is this going to work? And at the end, we had 250 people have dinner with us. And that was not, we didn't even fit all the people that we wanted to have. There were some people that just didn't work out. So what it showed me is that if you ask, if you put out the invitations, there are plenty of people that are willing to and want to come to dinner because they would have been alone themselves that night. So I hope people will take away not only the message about the military and what military families go through, but that there are a lot of people that are alone, and that the idea of getting back to a family dinner table and sharing a meal with your neighbors is still a good way to build a community.
Absolutely. What a beautiful story, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and all the best with the book.
Yes, thank you.